amongst you has heard of ChatGPT? Apparently some of you haven't, in which case you're either just not joining the fun or you really have been living under a rock for the last several months. Who has used some other AI apps? Anyone like to share what they've used it for? Who amongst you, and I know there's a couple because I've spoken to them already this evening, who amongst you has harboured some fears about AI and its effect on your job? So 14% of Australian managers believe that AI is leading to job losses. But 31% thought that it would lead to increased productivity. That was from an article in the Australian Financial Review about 5 months ago. And 46% of Australians thought that AI might replace them. That's 46% of the Australian survey compared to 49%, so basically half globally. IT, technology, has been through quite a number of other changes. How many of you remember this piece of high tech? Now yes, some of you I can see, and I won't name names or point fingers, but some of you probably weren't even crawling on the hearthrug when this was around. But I wasn't quite working, but I remember this sort of thing. A story I sometimes tell when looking at the history of AI, or the history of technology generally. I remember when I was about 4, my father used to come home from work with pages and pages of computer paper, the trifold stuff. As far as I was concerned, a computer was something that produced paper that was great to paint on. We have lived through a number of technology revolutions, evolutions, changes from even before this sort of stuff. In many ways, we are the lucky ones as far as technology and its changes are concerned. If this slide represents the population of Australia, this is the working population. So the people who've just disappeared are the people who are too young, too old, too something to currently have a job. This group is the group that work with technology. These are the people for whom a computer or some aspect of technology forms a tool of their trade. And this final group includes most of us. This final group are the people who actually work with technology, whether that's supporting, developing, creating, implementing, anything of that nature. These are the people, a relatively small number, but these are the people who directly work with technology. And from the reading that I've done, this group, which I believe includes everybody here this evening, we are relatively safe. This group, the tech workforce, has grown 8% in the last 12 months. So this is very much a growth sector. So having said all of that, why are there so many fears of AI? And perhaps more specifically, what should we fear? And it is what we should fear that I'm going to talk to you about this evening. So, as I've already told a few of you as I mingled a little bit earlier, apart from what I've already said, which didn't really scratch the surface, this presentation is not about AI. Rather than being about AI, what I'm going to talk to you about is what you may need to fear if you want to fear something as far as your role, your position as an IT professional, an IT consultant is concerned. So, based on about 30 years consulting, I'm going to suggest 3 ideas that I think form a risk to all of us. The first thing that I think we all should fear is being insular. What do I mean by being insular? Over to you people. And everything you've suggested is the sort of thing that I'm talking about being insular. An area that in my, more than I'm going to admit too often, of consulting in this space, where I see projects going off the rails, and I see a lot of them, and sometimes quite spectacularly going off the rails, is where we have got people who maybe are subject matter experts, but they are very, very, very narrow, and they don't know what sits around. So maybe they know one programming language extremely well, but they don't know how that affects a whole range of things that sit around it. With that, and that thought about a challenge of organisations relying very heavily on subject matter experts, and only last week I was helping a client in Melbourne sort out the product catalogue of their dynamics, and their internal project owner could not, and this absolutely wasn't for lack of trying, Ben tried incredibly hard, he could not find from anyone a complete list of products. And this was a membership-based organisation. They don't even sell a wide range of stuff, but nobody could give him the complete list. He'd go to one person and they'd say, well, I do this little bit. Go and talk to her. So he'd go and talk to her. I do this little bit. Go and talk to him. So he'd go and talk to him. I don't know. I just get emails and I put it in the system. And after 2 weeks of going from him to her to him and back again, he still couldn't get a complete list. are in trouble. So, what I would now like you to do is to take out your mobile phone and do what you're supposed to do with a QR code. So this is just a relatively small group of people's thinking about Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics 365 projects in general, without doing any of the precursive scoping and so on to get any specific. So imagine if the project, and I'm now going to ask you all to imagine that you're on one hypothetical project. Imagine if everyone on that project knows one of these aspects, which is if everyone knows one of those 20, 30, 40 aspects, and only one. So between you as a group, you've added somewhere between 40 and 60 different skills. We're not weighting them at the moment. And imagine if your project was totally staffed by people who knew one of those aspects, and not only knew one of those aspects, but knew nothing of the areas around their one area of expertise. Imagine what project meetings would be like. Recently I saw a diagram that was really rather attractive and interesting in what it showed. If you have a team of 3 people, there are 3 possible lines of communication, because you've got person A to person B, person A to person C, and person B to person C. Increase that team by 1, so we've now got a team of 4. How many lines of communication have we got? 4. Sorry?
4 more, at least 4.
It's actually 3 more,
3 more. Okay.
because it's 6. So once you start looking at them as a square, you've got A to B, A to C, A to D, B to D, B to C. So it's the 4 edges of the square and the 2 diagonals. I'm not going to test and embarrass myself with my arithmetic by taking it any further, but it is a parabolic curve. So we go up to 12 in a team, and it's a lot of lines of communication. So imagine now that we've got 12 people on the team with the relevant lines of communication, and all 12 people know one of those topics, and only one. So that should start to highlight the problem of being insular. Being insular certainly carries risks. And one of the ways that you can look after yourself is in your education. And maybe not just by going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into an area that you already know about, but think who's upstream from you in terms of the information flow. What do they know? What could you learn from that person? Who's downstream from you in the flow of information? What does that person know? What could you learn from them. Then, once you've looked upstream and downstream, look slightly more broadly. Who else is on the team? What do they know? Another area where I see this whole idea of insularity causing problems is in user stories. Now, I'm not knocking user stories, but stay for a moment in this idea of being insular. And now let's imagine a user story. As a salesperson, I need to be able to enter an order. As a business manager, I need a dashboard that shows me the team's results for the year. As a finance officer, I need, and I am sure you could all create another large number of similar user stories. Why am I saying that user stories are a problem? Thoughts? Now, from the user perspective, it's not a massive problem, or it's not something that I want you to think about too much just yet, but we'll come back to that. What I'd like you to think about is if we've got technical people who are talking to these users. So I'm going to role play the technical person, and I'm going to, tell me, what do you need from this system? Okay, I need the system, as a user, I need the system to be more user-friendly. So me being a nice, obedient and compliant techie, I run back to IT and I start doing all kinds of things to meet your need. And then I run over to you and you say, as a salesperson, I need to be able to enter orders. As a business manager, I need a dashboard. And so it goes on. And so we get a system, as you rightly said, that addresses the usability, the order entry, the dashboard, and whatever else I said. But nobody has seen the big picture, because we've taken the user story as essentially gospel. Years ago now, probably about 8, I was working on a project, and like many projects, we had a business analyst. Some of you might know a business analyst like this. She was incredibly good at running from the IT to the end user team and back. On a scale of 0 to 10, her knowledge of the business, if I'm generous, was 2. On a scale of 0 to 10, her analytical skill, well, less than her business skill. That sort of person is something that we need to be aware of, because they're out there. When I'm talking with my team or with my clients' teams, one of the things that I ask them to do, I often even mandate it, is to take the view of anything that they're implementing from what I call a human-centric view. Now, a human-centric view is a little bit different to a user-centric view. So a human-centric view is looking at the system or the requirements of a system from the perspective, first of all, as a user. So it might be the user that needs it to be more user-friendly, the user that needs to be able to enter orders, whatever. to consider it from the bowler hat. And the bowler hat is somebody who needs to use data or review data or make decisions based on data that the user, the straw hat, has already entered. So they're not entering the data per se, but they're very dependent on the data. So that's the second group of humans that we need to consider. The third group of users is this group here. So this is the technical people. Probably some of you people would wear that red and black hat. And it is the people who are developing the functionality and also supporting it. The fourth group is the group that wears this wonderful hat, and they are future people. So they might be users, they might be members of the technical team. What's important about the people that wear the psychedelic hat is they're not part of our organisation or our project right now. So they're people that we can't train, at least not as part of the actual development and rollout, because we don't know who they are. They're people who don't work for the organisation yet. So I advise whenever you're designing a piece of functionality, scoping, speccing, whatever that might mean, think about all four of these people. So we've got our current user, our data using person currently, our technical people currently, and then any of those people in the future. Another thing that I ask people to consider is we've had the user-centric view. I now counsel people to think when you get a business requirement, and it could be any business requirement, the need to enter orders, the need for a dashboard, even something that doesn't really fit into a user story per se, but it's a business requirement. What I ask people to do, first of all, is to brainstorm, and whether they do that from a team perspective or alone doesn't really matter, but work through finding as many possible ways to meet that requirement as possible. So one thing I often need to highlight is that's not 3 solutions. That is as many solutions as we can come up with, hence the solution N. That is as many possible solutions as we can come up with for that business requirement. Now within those N solutions that you and your colleagues have come up with, some of them probably are, they certainly ought to be, absolutely abysmal. That's great. Let's get them down, let's challenge them, and let's think, why is that idea so ridiculous? And what we do as we're working through that is we work out all the pros of each solution and all the cons of each solution. And following on from what I said a moment ago, we're not only thinking about our current users, let's also think about our friend wearing the psychedelic hat, or maybe I should say our friends wearing the psychedelic hat, who haven't yet joined the organisation, but will join the organisation later as users, data users, or technical team members. Now that whole slide is something that I find a lot of technical people really find quite challenging, because it is so tempting that you get a business requirement, and I'm going to give you a slightly ridiculous example, although it's a real example that came from one of my clients. We want age on the opportunity form. Why is wanting age on the opportunity form problematic? And what are some of the things that we want to get out? So, ideas? Please.
Age can change.
Never! You mean you're older today than you were last year? No. Lots of good reasons. So you can see, and we're obviously not going to do it in anger, but if that I want age on the opportunity had been a user story, which it could be, you know, as somebody selling insurance policies, I want to see the age of the person buying the policy on the opportunity form. There's a user story for you. It is a business requirement. Between us, pretty quickly, we've come up with multiple ways of solving that problem. And we've realised, thank you Zishan, that some of them are quite ridiculous. But we've also, thank you Liam, had one pretty good answer. That's a useful technique that you might choose to take away with you. Another challenge, and it's really an aspect of insularity, is thinking about me, myself, and I. I know it's very tempting to think that they're the three most important people in the universe, but I hate to disavow you of this. They're not. The challenge is, if you are thinking very much about me, myself, and I, it is very tempting, and this is where the comment that you made maybe comes in, you bring in bias. So you look at it from your perspective. Well, I could use that form. I know that this field means that. I know that I need to click on that little icon to save the record or I'll lose my data. To give you a few examples, that's great. You, as the person doing the design, knows these things. But do the people wearing the straw hat and the people wearing the psychedelic hat, do they all know it? And if not, what do you need to do to make sure that their data is kept, and so on and so on? One of the things that I've used, the story that I've told when I do train the trainer and I'm teaching people about training, which is one of the other things I do, I ask a question, but who is the one person that you can guarantee will not be in your audience when you're giving a presentation? But there is one person that you can guarantee is not going to be in your audience. Well done. Me, myself, and I. You will not be in the presentation. And yet, most people present as though the entire audience is their clones, with their experience and their ever forget your users. Remember, when I say users, I'm referring to all 4 of those hats we had a few slides ago. So not just the person who wants to be able to enter orders, who needs a dashboard, who wants it to be user-friendly. They're all reasonable things, but they're insular. I'd also like to flag to you that the majority of these projects that fail not for technical reasons, but they fail because of a failure in user adoption. And that typically happens because we didn't think about the users. We didn't put the user, and not just you as an individual user, but you and you and you and you and you. Every user's hat on. And for those users, we need to communicate to them about the reason that we're doing this project, the benefit, at least the benefit to them and to the organisation as a whole. I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. What does that mean to you? But hands up, anyone here who has been told by someone, could be a colleague, it doesn't have to be, but I sent you an email. Now, sure, maybe you did send me an email, but something's obviously gone wrong, because whether I didn't see it or it didn't arrive, but the point is, you sending an email about whatever it was about and hitting the send button, whether it's my fault, your fault, the technical wizardry between the two of us is fault, doesn't matter. The fact remains that message didn't reach me. We have another area where this becomes even more relevant in the society that we live in today. Anybody, any thoughts as to where my somewhat naughty brain is going? How many people here, and I'm guessing it's most of us, speak a second language? Okay, keep your hand up if that second language is one that you use at work. So if you people are representative of the people implementing these projects, it's a fair bet that half of the people that you're talking to are not working in their primary language. So think about that from a, but I told you to do it this way. Sure, you said it, but for whatever reason, about your language, your accent, the way you communicated, whatever, I didn't get that message. And what's important is the responsibility of communication sits with who? So it is the speaker, the writer, whatever. If you're the one that has the message, do it this way, or do this, or here's an email with some stuff in it, you can read it and follow my instructions. It is your responsibility to do a number of things. And we've got somebody else who is, put it this way, they're not in our lounge doing the work, sitting next to us. So what do you need to do? What can you do? That's a really good one, thank you. So have some form of interactive dialogue and check that the person has got the message that you've sent. What else can we do? And there are some things that are completely different to that.
Feedback.
Sorry?
Feedback.
That's pretty much the same thing. Fair point, but maybe. So that steps aside from the language perspective. If we use images as appropriate or diagrams, that's one thing. What else can we do? One thing, and this is something that I'm very fond of, is make sure we get the grammar correct. It's very simple in English in particular, but English and French, which are the two languages I speak, but I suspect it's true in other languages. Get the grammar slightly wrong, and you change the meaning completely. So you're thinking one thing, but you've written something completely different. Another area that we can be very careful about is clarity of communication. And that brings me on to an apocryphal story. Does the phrase "send 3 and 4pence" mean anything to anyone? It's almost certainly an apocryphal story, but it's reasonably well known. Okay, as we're running out of time somewhat, I will put you out of your misery. If you believe the story, apparently during the First World War, a message was sent from the front back to Whitehall. So the British Army were pushing forward against the Germans, and the message that was sent was "send reinforcements, we're going to advance." That got sent by, I tell you, you tell the person next to you, and so on. It worked its way up France. Somehow it crossed the channel, I don't know that bit of detail. And it got to Whitehall. Except it didn't. What got to Whitehall was "send 3 and 4pence, we're going to a dance." Now, as I said, it's an apocryphal story, but if it was true, I think we can be reasonably sure that the front line didn't get its reinforcements and certainly didn't get its 3 and 4pence, because the meaning has been completely lost. And that is probably because various people on that chain didn't check. They didn't take ownership. So obviously nobody knows quite how one became the other or where it became the other. But as I told you, and you told the person next to you, and he told the person next to him, and so on, obviously that message was getting morphed to garbage. So while we obviously have tools that weren't available 102, 3, 4, 5 years ago, there are other issues with communication. Another thing that I read when I was doing the work for this presentation was there are 3 things that matter when when you're working in a team. Communication, communication, and communication. The third area that I think is essential if we're going to be successful in this field and keep our role is know the functionality that Dynamics Power Platform, Power Automate, Power Pages, and so on give us out of the box or in the box. Now, there's an awful lot in that box. That's some of it, and I'll be fair, it's not all of it. Even with the second slide, it's not all of it. So there's a lot of stuff there. However, if we go back to that slide where we designed n possible solutions for a business requirement, we should be focusing on the solutions that are available out of the box before we start creating brand new stuff. And then, as well as what was on the previous slide, we also need to all know a bit about implementation methodology, about testing, about application lifecycle management, and training and learning. So there's a lot there, and I'm not going to deny that. But before you all go into an absolutely almighty panic and have alarms going off left, right, and centre, I am definitely not suggesting that everybody needs to know everything. That would be completely impossible, even for a smaller project. What I am suggesting, more than suggesting, is that you know a few of them well, and then you know a bit about the others. And I honestly think if you can hand on heart say that of the dozen or whatever points on the previous couple of slides, that there are 4 of them, for the sake of argument, that you know well, and you know a bit, so you can do a 10-minute presentation on most of the others, you're in a pretty good position. And when I say you should know something, what that means is you should know what they are. You should know why they add value to a project. You should know when it is appropriate to use them. And perhaps more importantly than that, you should know when it's not appropriate to use them. And go back to that business requirement, n possible solutions, that will help you rule some of those solutions out. I touched on this earlier, but there are 3 things that we need to get right if our project is going to be successful. So the first is technology. And yes, I know that one's very small, I was limited. The second is the process, or more likely the processes, that we need to implement. And the third is all about people. And the reason I got stuck with having to do the tech so small is because they are in proportion. So, of the things that are important, 10% of project success will probably come from getting the processes right and process-related factors. And 60% will come from people-related factors, user adoption, change management, and a whole heap of other related bits. I'd now like to ask you a question. What do you think about your breadth of knowledge about Dynamics 365 and Power Platform? I'm not going to ask you to answer that question, I'm going to ask you to think about it. And just to wrap up, almost, would you want these people to have the level of knowledge in medicine, surgery that you've got in Dynamics if you were the one lying on the table? So, questions?